Jeff, it is a pleasure to be here with you. As we've discussed a bit before, it's funny, kind of a full circle moment for me, because in 2009, when I was an undergraduate at Davidson College in North Carolina, I was, senior. I was trying to figure out what were my next steps. What was I going to do? How was I going to, you know, make the impact on the world that this sort of youthful idealism um, that was sort of brewing in me, wanted to do when I was in college. And um, a friend took me down. I think it was to the Charlotte Convention Center, and you were speaking there. I can't remember what the event was, but it was the first time I'd seen you speak. Um, and you got on stage and you did your thing, maybe 30 minutes, and then I left the convention center that day, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna be a teacher. That's what I'm gonna do. Like you made it so clear, and I was so moved and so inspired by the way you talked about our young people, by the way you talked about how central this work was to the sort of larger landscape of inequality and the larger history of pushing back against the oppression that our communities have experienced. And it is some work that you have done for so many years. And I just thank you for that, because I went on to become a teacher, and then I went to the Graduate School of Education to get my PhD, and now I'm a staff writer at the Atlantic, and someone who writes a lot about race and inequality in education, and a lot of that can be tied back, I think, to that moment. And so I'm just grateful to be here with you.
That's wonderful for you to say it, Clint, first of all. And, many, many years before that event happened, I went to Washington, D.C. because I just had this passion, right, that I wanted to do something. And this was in like the mid 80s. And I went to this conference and I heard this woman speak. And it was Marian Wright Edelman. I left there not knowing that years later we would get together and do some work. It changed me.
Yeah.
It made me determined that I had to do more. And so it's interesting. We never know the impact we have. And I told Marian that story. And I was so far back in the audience from her that I didn't even know she was a Black lady. That's how far back I was. I was so stunned when I realized this Black woman had been out there fighting for our children. And she's been a role model to me. And I think every time those of us in education need to, remember our role of sort of passing on to the next generation the history. And, when you start tracing this history,
right,
this goes back through slavery, through Douglass and Booker T, and that whole conversation about the role of African Americans in education. And I consider us to be continuing that legacy. And I'm always thrilled to see that legacy continues in people like yourself, Clint. And you're going to make sure that we continue to move this movement forward for our children.
Yeah, it is really. I've too heard Marian Wright Edelman speak, and I mean, she's just, as you said, like a force of nature. And it's fascinating as you speak to hear it, to think about it as this sort of intergenerational lineage that is created between Black educators, Black activists, Black thinkers. And as a writer, I always think about the lineage that I'm a part of. I think about, the fact that I'm only here because of Baldwin. I'm only here because of Hurston. I'm only here because of Morrison. I'm only here because of Ellison. I'm only here because of Douglass. I'm only here because of Phyllis Wheatley, right? And the same thing manifests itself in education. And one thing that I'm wondering from your end is that, when we talk about intergenerational work, you've been doing this work for so much of your life, and I'm 2020 has been a year. It has been a year, and it also is a year in which we're in such a different political, social, and sort of like collective psychological moment as a country. I think all the time about how different this political moment feels than even when I graduated from college. And I think about how the myriad of things that have happened over the past decade of my adulthood have reshaped and reoriented and clarified my own politics and the way that I approach the work of, of fighting inequality in whatever form that takes. And I'm curious for you, the world you entered, the America that you began doing this work in, is in some ways very similar, but is also in some ways very different. The sort of ethos
Yeah.
of how we think about inequality collectively. And
Yeah.
I'm just curious how you think about what is the same about the work that you are leading, and what has changed, and what have your ideas changed over time in terms of how you think about your approach to this?
It's interesting, Clint, because when I left the ed school in '75, right, I took a job in Boston. And if anybody knows New England, in 1975, Boston was going through busing.
Mm.
And I'm a New Yorker.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know really anything about the neighborhoods in Boston and the racism, and they were throwing bricks at the buses with Black children on it. And I thought to myself, where in the hell am I at? Is this like Mississippi? I mean, this was Boston. And one of the things I began to understand, because I was working in a school that was mostly all white students, and I tell folks, my first day of going into the school, these were all kids who were kicked out of the Boston public schools, mostly because of racist acts and violence and other things. And I was like the Black teacher in that school. And I tell folks it was the teacher's equivalent of guess who's coming for dinner, my first day of class, right? Those kids took one look at me like, how did we end up with this guy? Right. But I'll tell you what struck me and has sort of challenged my thinking about education. These were poor white kids. They were from poor communities in the housing projects in Charlestown and East Boston and Southie. And absent the racism, they were like the kids I grew up with. They felt hopeless, abandoned, discriminated against, excluded, isolated. And what the behaviors led to the same kinds of behaviors that I was seeing growing up in the South Bronx. Kids who were getting into drugs, alcohol, crime, thought their life had no future. And it struck me that the combination of what happens to poor people in this country is horrible, even if you're white. When you throw race on top of that, it sets up a set of dynamics that has trapped so many of our young people for generations. What I think is different now in this moment is that two things are more crystallized. The racism and the impact that it's having because of cell phones is something that just, I mean, you would tell people this stuff was happening and they were like, there he goes again.
Oh, every time I turn now it can be documented.
Yes. So now I think white people have to confront the fact that every other week there's another story and another story, and all the stories are the same. I mean, the most recent story, on the 9th of December, I just reading about some guy some poor Black 23-year-old guy walking into his house and being killed by the police. And this is it just doesn't end. And I think part of what is happening is America is realizing, hey, we've got a real problem here. But what makes it crazy is you're putting that on top of a presidency which has done everything it's seemingly humanly possible to actually stir up racism, to stir up violence, to stir up prejudice in this country at the same time. So you have this schizophrenic America now. You've got folks who are saying and marching and saying, we've got to stop this. We've got to Black Lives Matter. And at the same time, you're seeing these conspiracy theories grow, the assaults on folks who are trying to deal with the truth and science and other things. And so I think in some ways, this is a very complicated time for those of us who care about social justice and social and economic mobility in this country.
Do you think that this summer, I guess, has represented what was perhaps the largest, most significant racial reckoning this country has had since the 60s, I think most people would say. And it remains to be seen to what extent that continues, in the coming months and years. But I wonder how much that, if at all, has shaped and not even just what happened this summer, but the Black Lives Matter movement since 2012, 2013,
Yep.
and in 2014 when Mike Brown was killed, and obviously Trayvon Martin before that, where the conversation around race in this country began to shift, feels like, in a real way. And these are obviously issues that, again, that you've been thinking about for a long time. But as someone who goes and both like does the work in the community and then talks to people all across the country and the world about these issues, have you noticed anything different about how people are thinking about the relationship between race and education, sort of externally, when you go talk to these groups? And then also, I'm curious how so much of what has happened over the last several years has either changed or cemented or clarified what you all are doing at the Harlem Children's Zone.
Yeah, but so it's both great questions. I think there is a new awakening in this country about the sort of causes and current supports of what has been a racist history in America. I think the biggest challenge Americans have, and white Americans, and I'm gonna separate a group that's in real denial because their class standing, right? Their self-definition is being challenged as sort of white and privileged. And I think mostly if it's a lot of education is associated with this, but this identity of who we are is being threatened by those of us who are trying to force this country to reckon with who we really have been. Right. America is the land of the free and home of the brave. Not if you've been people of color. The lies that have been told about who we were and what we did, starting from Thanksgiving and moving onwards in this country, suggest a reckoning of a history of, I think, not just slavery, and in many cases, the theft of land and property, the destruction of peoples across this country who were Native Americans, African Americans, what happened to the Japanese and other Asian folks in this country. That reckoning of who we are as America has vestiges which exist even today, and I think in general is called white privilege. But using terminology like that makes folks feel like they are being blamed for something that they did not do. And so you have folks trying to reconcile, how can I deal with some of the history and understand current situations based on sort of what has happened over time? But how do I also deal with the fact that I'm being held responsible for something that I don't feel like I actually did? Even if I have to say I kind of did something, I don't really know what that is. I think that's a funny place in this country, and I think it's real. I mean, I'm talking to corporate execs, Fortune 500 companies, and they're trying to understand what this really means and what they should be doing because of it.
Do you find that to be genuine? Because one of the things I always wonder is because now it is in vogue to say like Black Lives Matter, to make a statement, and on one level, I think it really represents a cultural and social sea change. On another level, I wonder, and I'm specifically curious what you think, because you do interface with so many of these like corporate executives, Wall Street folks. Like, do you think there's been like a real shift in their thinking, or is it?
I think there's been a real shift, and I think all of us watched the torture and death of a Black man that went on for minutes and minutes and minutes. And I don't know anybody who didn't see that. And if you were going to create a movie and you want to show a callousness, a sense of total disregard for Blackness, you couldn't have done a better imaging than watching that police officer on that Black man's neck while he died. And no one doing anything except the people on the side pleading, stop, you're killing him. I think that on top of then the other issues, the other killings. Oh, I think that has actually impacted the part, not all, part of the white leadership in this country in a way that has never happened before. And I think it's real. And I think they honestly want to do something about it. Now, how wide that group is, I cannot say. I have talked to 4 or 5, so I don't have anything that sort of has, and I think it's actually genuine, and I think there's an opportunity to try to do some things different during this time. But at the same time that's going on, Clint, what I see because of COVID, because of the lack of schooling, because of what has happened in poor Black and brown communities, the death, the suffering, the sickness, the fear, the anxiety, and the mental health, we are watching the sowing of the seeds of the next generation's inequality right in front of our eyes. And I do not feel like this country has taken this seriously. I do not think they've taken the education challenges seriously. So look, we all were caught off guard in March when everything shut down, right? And they sent kids home and kids didn't have devices and they didn't have connectivity and okay. 6 months later, the fact that we had done nothing to correct a lot of this, that we had done nothing to help teachers become better instructors online, to help develop curriculums that would engage more kids of color, to think through what was happening with special education and English as a second language students, that we have right now kids who literally have not been in school for 7 months. Not a few kids, millions of them, mostly poor. Black and brown kids in this country, to me, is an absolute disgrace. And with all the talk out there about Black Lives Matter, I am fuming because they don't matter enough for us to have done anything to try and improve the educational outcomes for a group of kids right now who are struggling in this country. So it sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. Yes, there's an awakening. People are aware this other thing is happening right now. And I think it's a crisis that I am absolutely stunned, because you can't make up that time. You can't make up a year of a kid missing a year of school in like 1 or 2 years. There's just no evidence. This is going to take a decade of really serious hard work to try to sort of remediate what is happening to this group of children in this country. Who have been isolated, who have been terrified, and who have not gotten any education at all for this period of time. And I'm going to yell and scream about this as much as humanly possible.
No, I absolutely. And part of what you're saying really makes me think often of this 1963 essay by James Baldwin, A Talk to Teachers. And I think it's originally a speech that he gave to a group of New York City educators. And in it, one of the things that he says is that one of the role of the teacher is in part to the role of the teacher of Black children is in part to communicate to that child and to communicate to the world that even though we have been inundated with a message that says the child is the criminal, the child is the problem, the child is the thing that needs to be fixed, it is in fact the society that is the criminal, is the society that is the culprit, right? Is the society that has created the conditions and the systems and the structures that have allowed for a certain set of conditions to fester in these communities. And what we're seeing, I think right now, is a sort of microcosm of that, right? Like, you can't blame these children for what is happening, for the conditions that are happening. And as you said before, it goes back, this is tied to every different iteration of public policy that has been put in place specifically to create economic disinvestment from certain communities. That, whether it be like I talk all the time about the New Deal and the communities that invested in and the communities that didn't invest in the GI Bill. I mean, you look around New York, and the reason New York looks the way that it does is because of resources, state-sanctioned resources, were allotted to some people and they were not allotted to others. And then generations later, people want to act surprised when there are disparate outcomes along the lines that these resources were allotted. And I think it's what is, to your point, the sort of complicated duality of this. I think it's heartening because I think more people are are cognizant of that now, right? Like when I listen to the radio or I watch TV, more people are, even when they talk about COVID, there's been this push to make sure that when you say that Black and brown folks are being disproportionately impacted, that it's not because of things that Black and brown people do, but it's instead because of a large history of medical discrimination. It's because
Yes.
Black people and brown people are most likely to be in the frontline jobs because of a history of, I mean, it's just, low wage job, live in intergenerational housing, and all of that is tied to poverty, and all of that is tied to, again, this history of economic disinvestment. So I think that's heartening, but at the same time, it's like, well, what are we going to do?
Yeah. What are we going to do?
What are we going to do? And for you, I know we have a limited amount of time, but like, how are you all thinking about? I mean, the stakes of the work have always been high in educating our kids, and in making sure that our communities have the sort of robust social infrastructure necessary for them to thrive. But coming out of this thing, I mean, I mean, it's going to be more important than ever. So how are you all thinking about what needs to be done moving forward, not only for this year, but as you said, for the next decade or more?
Well, this timing thing is funny, and I have a deep sense of faith, and God has been part of my life. And I tell folks, God often sends me directions, but I'm hard-headed and I don't listen, and it has to get 4 or 5 different messages before I get it. I was retired for 7 years, and I came out of retirement before COVID because I know that to overcome the hundreds of years of intentional disinvestment in our communities, which have done exactly what they were intended to do, to handicap and cripple a people and make it almost it's so extraordinary for them to get out of it that anytime anybody gets out, they become oh, Jeff, how did you get out of the South Bronx? Isn't that wonderful? That is just one of the most horrible things you can recognize. Someplace is so devastating to a people that if someone gets out, we actually celebrate it and try and figure out, well, how did you manage to get out? Well, I created the William Julius Wilson Institute, and I don't know if you know Bill Wilson's work. He started in Chicago and ended up at Harvard, but he talked about the conditions that are created when you undermine the economic and social fabric of community and what happens to people. And we decided at the Institute that we're going to go out and push this country to recognize that we can't count on schools by themselves. You can't simply go say, oh yeah, the classroom teacher is going to overcome all of these obstacles facing in these communities, that we've got to rebuild these communities. We've got to support families. We got to have comprehensive health and safety and mental health supports for children and families, literally from cradle to career. And that is the only way that we're going to make up for all of the challenges that our children are facing. And it's comprehensive, and we've got to have massive investments in these places. And like, I'm all for Black Lives Matter, but let's invest real resources in Black and brown communities that are struggling so that we can begin to rebuild these communities the way that we've done in Central Harlem. So I'm out of retirement now. We are working with people around the country who are doing similar work, trying to build cradle to career opportunities for children to support their education. And I think that this work is now, because of COVID, more important than ever. We see what happens in places, all the comorbidity issues that impact our people. Who are the ones losing their jobs? Who are the ones whose small businesses are closing? Who are the ones who have to be on the trains and buses risking their lives to make sure those of us can have food and other things? It is the poor Black and brown folks in our communities, and we have to support these places differently. And I think that there's one thing to give lip service to this issue. It's another to say we're actually going to do the kind of investment in these places to level this playing field so people have a real opportunity. So that's what I'm going to spend the next portion of my life fighting for. And there are a group of folks who I think around this country feel the same way about these issues.
Absolutely. And I think, as we close out this conversation, I just want to say, to teachers who are watching, educators who are watching, I mean, I think it's important to be clear that although the system has failed our young people, and continues to fail our young people enormously. I've been so inspired by, I've been so struck by, um, I've been so moved by the teachers in this moment who have just gone above and beyond, who have, who are some are teaching from online, some are teaching in school, some are doing both, some have to create lesson plans for the computer, some have to create and also lesson plans for in person, some are raising their own kids while they're teaching online, they're putting their own families at risk, they're dropping assignments off social distance at students' homes, they're on the phone with students long into the night doing extra Zoom sessions. I mean, the things that, I was a teacher for a few years before graduate school, as I said, and it is as you know, as an educator, it is the most rewarding, but by far the hardest work I've ever done in my life.
Hardest job.
I simply can't imagine. I can't imagine doing it in this moment, and to see so many teachers who have just gone above and beyond. I think is, we got to support them. We got to provide them with the support that they need in order to do their job.
This is the challenge, you get in that classroom, and they shut the door, and if you don't buy it, it's not there. The kids don't have what they need. We have just, in my opinion, underinvested in educators, both in the supports that schools need to provide, but also in just the salaries and the other kinds of supports that folks need to live on. Around this country, it is really criminal what folks are paid to educate our kids. And the one thing, there's nothing good about this, but I'm hoping that parents have a new appreciation of the role that teachers play in the lives as they have tried to figure out themselves, how am I going to manage to educate this kid? If the Biden administration is serious about this issue of inequality, then they're going to really invest in education and teachers and giving the tools that are necessary. Because as you say, teachers they're there. No one went into teaching because they thought they were going to make a bunch of money. People went in because they want to help children. And we just haven't given them the right tools to do so. And I think that that's another one of these issues we've got to fight for.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, it has been a pleasure to have this conversation. We could go on for hours, but I know this won't be the last time. So appreciate you being in conversation with me.
Thanks, Clint. Really appreciate it, brother. Just congratulations on what you're doing, what you're writing about, and keeping this country aware of important issues.
Appreciate it.